Hello and welcome to Mandibil. This is part 2 of my deconstruction of Stefan Molyneux' essay on metaphysics. And we went around the 8-minute mark in the last part yesterday, and now we're just heading into the rest to see how far we will get this time.
The moment that you correct me or object to my arguments, you have established every root premise required for the acceptance of objective and empirical reality. If you disagree with me and want to argue with me rather than with yourself, then you accept that I exist independent of your mind. You also accept property rights, by the way, because you accept that I am responsible for the products of my actions, that it is my argument. By demanding that I provide proof, you are demanding that I conform to an objective standard of reason and evidence, and that something is not true just because I say it is true. In other words, you accept a standard independent of consciousness to validate truth claims made.
Accepting a standard independent of consciousness. Now, it's actually incredible that somebody claiming to be, a brilliant philosopher going on 40 years, talking about things that is independent of that tool, the only tool he has in order to have any idea what is going on, so to say, right? What on earth is going on? Saying that you have insights into that which is independent of that tool you use to get insights is fucking crazy, right? It is crazy. Materialism is kind of crazy in this regard, right? I know that it works from a base point of view, that if you tell yourself your experience is that actual outside, it works to a certain point. And that point is when you have to agree or disagree with other people, right? Other individuals. Then your idea of what is out there compared to their idea of what is out there is conflicted, because this kind of idealizing that potential external world as being a direct access or something you have direct access to removes the necessity for agreement upon what is going on, right? So when he says things are objective, that objectivity is not something he has reached by an agreement with somebody else, but purely by his own fantastic insight into that which is independent of his mind, right? I think that's the basic problem of why there are things not going according to how we in general might want things to go in the world. This leap of thinking that you have direct access to an external world that somebody else has a different opinion about, that freaks people out. That creates this. This is what creates this. Well, if you don't agree with me, there's something wrong with you, right? So we might as well just kill you, right? You have a bad think because I know what is right. And add to that, people add all sorts of stuff that they don't experience directly, but it's a part of the mind, like, government and things like that, country, which doesn't exist. It's just an artificial construct, right? All these things is what this lack of agreement about, you could say, a lack of acceptance of disagreement about that external world is what creates problems, in my opinion, right? That's sort of the conclusion I have arrived at. Why? And, it's like when people are challenged on this idea of their perfect external world, they are almost, just like Stefan Molyneux, bound to be scared shitless, right? It can only be because these weird people are out to get you, out to confuse you, so they can take advantage of you or something like that. And then these philosophers who have actually identified this problem, this paradox that nobody in general seems to be able to notice, are stopping and saying, hey, wait a minute, there might be a problem here in what you're thinking, right? And they're just, get away from me, it's crazy, just like Stefan Molyneux, right? So if this, if the identification of this paradox is mandatory for you to do good philosophy, then you can already classify all those who haven't done it just by listening to how they phrase the phrases they use and how they explain when you get to things like metaphysics. How the words they use will implicitly tell you whether or not they're materialists or idealists, right? And if you took a rounded up, with 1,000 philosophers, 970, just, slap on the back, right? Would say they're materialists, or they would say these 30 weirdo idealists, they're crazy, right? So no wonder that things are going to hell in a handbasket throughout human history, because they're basically fighting over their understanding of what exists and how to handle that in sort of a moral manner, right? So,
a human mind. Now, it could be the case that you believe that another personality within your own mind wrote the arguments above, in which case you will never contact me to correct me, or never tell anyone that I am wrong, but rather will descend into arguing with yourself, which will remain invisible to everyone else. If both you and I exist, and language has meaning, and arguments must conform.
No, you just said we both exist. You shouldn't say if we exist now. You just claim that we both exist, right? Is it sort of, okay, because we have settled now that we exist, therefore this. So it's sort of a slightly bad formulation to say if we exist, right? Which is sort of hypothetical, while you were completely certain just before. So,
objective standards in order to be valid, and an objective empirical reality exists that we both inhabit, and the senses are valid.
What do you mean we inhabit? What do you mean when you say in? What do you mean by these terms, right? It has to be more clear what you're talking about. Inhabit, what do you mean? How do you get to what you mean by inhabit? You are using a term that called inhabit. What is entailed in it from a philosophical point of view? How do you get to that? What are you basing that term on when you say inhabit? Do you mean you experience some colors and shapes and sounds and tastes, or what, right? That makes you say, aha, and therefore inhabit. This thing are just throwing around terms that already have an established meaning, of course, otherwise you wouldn't use them, and you're sort of happy about this language that has certain terms that has certain meanings. But that's not how you do philosophy. Certainly not this level of philosophy. You have to define from that blank slate, or the next step from that blank slate, how you get to these things. You can't take things for granted in basic metaphysics. You're just rambling and spouting words. That's not philosophy, right? You're not presenting philosophy. You're presenting potential conclusions. But that's not philosophy, right? Just like if you want to, if you're in a mathematics exam and you have sort of some kind of calculation of, second degree polynomial, whatever, right? Something. And you say, okay, the result is 23. That's not interesting, right? What is interesting, how the hell did you get to 23, right? So therefore, it's about what's the chain of arguments from the reduction base, as I would call it, that which is foundational to your metaphysics or to all of your philosophy. How do you get from that to, for instance, what was the term you used? Inhabit, for instance, right? What does it mean to inhabit? If you're talking about, what do you mean by inhabit? And it's different. My understanding, from my point of view, is different from your understanding of me inhabiting whatever, right? So it's just like thinking that you are explaining things in a philosophical way here is a misunderstanding of what it really entails to do good philosophy, in my opinion, right?
What answers required by metaphysics have not been provided. The question of whether other minds exist.
Oh, I just got a notion. Maybe dudes like Stefan, just the introduction that he said metaphysics is a disease to be gotten rid of, right? Like, actually, maybe he thinks that metaphysics is just useless. It's an artificial part of philosophy. You don't need to do metaphysics. It's already there. You don't need to think about it. You just have to accept that whatever world he is thinking about here or referring to. The meaning or the understanding of it being a disease is people are doing this philosophy that is superfluous. You don't need to do this. It's given to you. You have that insight. You don't be skeptical about it. Don't philosophize about it. It's given to you. There's nothing to philosophize about. Basically, I think that's what he's saying. He's actually rejecting the whole idea of metaphysics. And he's only addressing it because somebody else is talking about metaphysics or certain kinds of philosophy that has been labeled as metaphysics. Maybe that's that would actually make sense if that's this approach is just sort of hidden in his way of form. He doesn't say it straight up, right? But then, if that's the case with Stefan Molyneux, you might fabulate or use a few minutes to think about where the whole idea of metaphysics originally arises from, which was some works from Aristotle, which is one of his his favorite philosopher, maybe except for Ayn Rand, right? Who had made some I think his lecture notes or something like that, right? In his academia there in Athens, where he did some physics, and then there's something that is meta in Greek is sort of after, I think, and then it can also be maybe interpreted as before or above or besides or something like that, or near to, something like that, right? But I think it's sort of above or after or in that it's meta in the sense that it is something you do before you can do the actual thing. If you do metaphysics, that's what you need to establish before you can do physics, right? If it ethics and metaethics, well, you have to sort of do metaethics before you can do ethics. I wouldn't necessarily agree with that. I mean, I think it's a misnomer to talk about metaethics. But that's another story I can talk about some other time. I have sort of lifted the veil a bit up on that in a few of my recent videos, right? But if Aristotle was the dude who's actually talking about these aspects, which is maybe the most, the best known of from the ancient world is Plato, I would think, right? Metaphysics of Plato is and maybe that's sort of a spin-off from Socrates. That's hard to say, right? I am not necessarily trusting that Plato, repeated word for word what Socrates said. He was dead and gone, and Plato was possibly spooked out of his skull when they killed Socrates, his mentor, right? That would possibly leave deep scars for the rest of his life, and he had to navigate the environment. And how would you do that, right? Making dialogues of Socrates, but maybe shaping them so they wouldn't make certain people angry, so something like that, right? So, but actually, it might actually make sense that his approach is you actually don't need to. That would explain why he's so angry about people talking about this, right? Because he thinks it's completely unnecessary to do. It's given to you. Why are you fabulating about this? Don't do that, right? Just accept what is handed to you by that benevolent demon there.
Easily answered. Does knowledge exist in the world that you have not yet attained? I don't speak Japanese.
Does knowledge exist in the world that you have not yet attained? I'm not completely sure about what the term attain, sort of received or have gotten a grasp on, something like that. I mean, knowledge is not something that floats around somewhere. That's a specific philosophical categorization of particular aspects of your experience, or that which is derived from your experience, maybe, right? Knowledge is something that goes on in your mind. It's not something that floats around out there. That's what I'm hearing, right?
But I accept that the Japanese language exists and is valid and is spoken by millions and millions.
What do you mean by exist? You have to define these terms, you fucking moron, man. What do you mean by exist? Is it empirical? So I can, what color does a language have? What sound does a language have? What smell does a language have? It has none of these, so it's not something that exists, right? It can merely be an abstraction or something like that within your mind that you call a language, right? What are your criteria for these kinds of terms? It's obnoxious that you're never defining anything, you're just throwing words around.
People. I do not have the mathematical ability to plot a course for a spaceship to pass by the planet Pluto, but I accept that others do have this ability because spaceships have...
Accepting is not knowledge, right? Accepting is not... Somebody makes a sound that you interpret as a certain thing that you can claim to be knowledge, apparently, and then it becomes knowledge to you, right? That is far removed from the idea of empiricism, right? Because you have to have experiences. It's not enough that somebody says, yeah, I had experience of it yesterday, so now I'm telling you and you have knowledge now. No. That doesn't work. If you're an empiricist, you need to stand by your fucking principle, right? Then you need that experience you claim in order to have knowledge, right? Which is the limitations of knowledge in empiricism. The limitation is that you have to have experiences, right? You have to have the qualia, whatever that thing you claim knowledge of, right? You don't have that when somebody tells you, I saw X yesterday, right? That's just a claim. It's not even evidential, right? It's just a claim.
Passed by the planet Pluto. I do not have the ability to forecast the weather, but I accept that weather forecasters exist and are usually accurate.
Usually accurate. I accept this and I accept that. That's not philosophy, right? Your sort of reasonings and rationalizations about how you interpret your experience, that's not necessarily knowledge or metaphysics for that matter, right? And don't mix metaphysics and knowledge, right? Which you have done several times now in this presentation or this essay on metaphysics, right? It's ridiculously lazy.
I do not have the ability to build a computer from scratch. and program voice recognition software to type out what I am saying. But this is how I am producing this article, so I accept that other people exist who possess knowledge that I do not. Songs come into my ears that I did not compose. I consume books I did not write. And I eat food that I do not know how to produce. I drive a car I did not create myself, cooled by an air conditioning system I do not understand, powered by gasoline that I did not dig out of the earth. Since I am perpetually surrounded by the products of minds not my own, and in fact I need to accept the products of my...
What do you mean, that product of minds? Yeah, but it's not knowledge you're referring to, because nobody can experience somebody else's mind. I'm not saying they don't have minds. Please don't overinterpret what I'm saying. But this is given to me, this is given to me, this is given to me, and I don't have to explain it, and I don't have to, define anything. That's not philosophy, right? I'm not saying that people don't have minds, but don't tell me you have access to whether or not some object has been created because of some mind. Yes, you can reason towards it, and maybe you can call it some kind of evidence, but it's not knowledge. And that's what we're going for when we're doing metaphysics, right? Or that's the highest level of further philosophy after metaphysics, before you get into ethics maybe, right? So all these things that are, I experience this, I experience that, that's a part of, I would almost say it's a part of epistemology. That's how you delineate where you can have knowledge from where you cannot have knowledge, right? What would you classify as knowledge then within that which can be knowledge? Those are the things you do in metaphysics, right? You don't talk about there's a bicycle and there's a brain and there's a whatever, right? Those are interpretations of that which can be known. That's what you do in epistemology when you do the thing, right? When you do that philosophy in order to get to knowledge. So it's in my opinion, he's sort of all over the place in this, right? And because he's so eloquent in his way of putting it together, it may sound convincing to people who's not well trained or have skilled themselves in understanding what is good and what isn't good philosophy, right? This is certainly not good philosophy.
Not my own.
Or it's surely not, I would say, certainly. I don't like certain.
In order to make this argument and share it, it would be truly perverse for me to deny that which I require to make my argument. This would be like a jazz trumpeter claiming that he did not need to breathe in order to produce music, or a dairy farmer claiming that he did not need cows to produce milk. So, if minds exist other than my own, the question must be, where do they exist? Remember, I said that metaphysics was the study of everything in the universe except the human mind. So naturally, if minds other than my own exist, they must exist in an empirical, objective realm. Why must they exist
But that realm is not in itself empirical or objective. What are you referring to? When you're putting it this way, it is as if that objectivity and that empiricism arrives at you, right? No, these are delineations of what it means when you interpret this experience, right? What does it mean that some reference to that experience is objective? What does it mean that it's empirical, right? Empiricism doesn't arrive, or empirical things doesn't arrive. Things arrive, and then you label them, or you classify, or what's the word I'm looking for? You delineate when it can be knowledge, for instance, and when it can't be knowledge, right? I would say that's fine to do that in metaphysics, as I said before. But when you start to talk about bicycles, anything like that, then you're going into epistemology, right? That's not what you should do in metaphysics, in my opinion, as I've said so many times now, right? It's the way you put these words as if it feels to me as if this thing you are so desperate to get people to accept is just the case and 100%, as you said in some video recently, right? And then you're labeling it. It's empirical, it's objective, it's rational, it's reasonable, it's evidence. You're just slamming particular kinds of labels on it until people say, "Okay, I guess he's right." It's so unapproachable philosophically. I just have to accept it's just there, right? No, throwing words at stuff doesn't make it good philosophy, right? You have to have that starting point. Why are you not starting from that blank slate you referred to just earlier, right? When you have a blank slate, what do you do next, right? Well, what you do next is you establish what I would call the reduction base. What are the basic, your Legos, philosophical Lego, what's it called? These Lego, squares, at least when I was a kid, right? Building blocks of the philosophy, and the arguments that follow from that, and the axioms and so on, they need to be traceable in a direct line back to that reduction base, so people can say, yeah, he's still not just pulling things out of his ass. The arguments hangs together all the way back to the reduction base. Nothing like that is being done here, right? It's just throwing around, it's objective, it's rational, it's it's empirical, it's certain, it doesn't prove anything. It doesn't point to anything. It doesn't relate to anything that is in any kind of reduction base. So he's just farting basically philosophically in the wind, right?
Empirical realm. Well, simply because I have no way of confirming the existence of other minds without using the empirical evidence of my senses. Since
it's a mid-sentence, I know, but he can use his senses to experience other people's minds? This is an ongoing problem in philosophy, which is you do not have access to experiences of other people's minds. And for good reasons, you will understand that if you understood the problem you can't, understand, right? Which is built into the foundations of your understanding of this, right? You do not have access to other people's minds. And in no way or shape or form you can have that, right? Because you're completely removed from it.
Does not exist. I must read the products of other minds through their writing, or view their paintings, or listen to their music, or touch their fabric, or taste their food. Every single piece of evidence for the existence of other minds comes to me through my senses. Now, if I reject the evidence of my...
But please explain how that arrives. What does it look like? What color does that mind have? What sound? What taste? Are you tasting somebody else's mind? Are you feeling it? Are you listening? How do you get to that mind? Explain yourself, for fuck's sake, man.
Then no one has to worry about my arguments for very long, because I will walk into traffic or step off a building or refuse to eat or drink.
So because there's a car that you didn't build, but nature cannot build it on its own, that means you all of a sudden know that there's a mind somewhere else? Yes, I'm fine with the reasoning and the sort of evidence approach to it, but that doesn't mean you know there's a mind. As I said before, it doesn't mean, my argument doesn't say that means there isn't a mind. Please you can't get to it, right? You can't get to it. This black and white thinking that leaves no room for I don't know, right? You have to be able to say I don't know when you're a philosopher. That's the most important answer you can give. right? That's the first thing you should learn in philosophy school. That is to say, I don't know, and when to say, I don't know, which is a hell of a lot of times, right?
To me and tell me that I am wrong about something, I will simply tell you that I never said such a thing. If you provide me...
And maybe you should take that lecture from, Socrates, who is most famous for saying the only thing I know is that I know nothing, right? So he's fanboying Socrates, at least to some extent, or maybe he did that in the early days, right? But he doesn't seem to take to heart this idea of skepticism and, being skeptical of what you can know. And when you have knowledge and when you don't have knowledge, right?
that I did, I will simply say that your senses have deceived you into misinterpreting that evidence, and we will never have to discuss anything of any philosophical or intellectual import. By rejecting the evidence of the senses, you exclude yourself from any participation.
But who says who says you're rejecting your senses or the evidence of your senses? I don't know why you have to say the evidence of the senses. There's nothing about the senses itself that necessitates you calling that evidence, right? You're presupposing things. You're loading your experiences with meaning that doesn't arrive through the senses. You attach the meaning from the inside, right? So to say. There's no evidence in the senses. It doesn't arrive with the senses. If you call it evidence, that's your decision from the inside of your mind, so to say, right? Nothing arrives from the outside except the empirical experiences. Colors, sounds, taste, and so on. That's what you've got. That's the closest thing you have to that fabled outside, right? You're so hung up on, right? I mean, for good reasons, right? It's important. It's not like I'm not trying to diminish the importance of that potential outside, right? Of course not. But his fetish on claiming direct access and certainty and all that, which is completely ridiculous.
Realm of philosophy, since all philosophical material must be communicated through the evidence of the senses. Making the philosophical argument that you reject the senses is truly as insane as taking a train journey with...
I need to repeat that what good idealist philosophers are talking about is not rejecting your senses or your qualia, your experience or your conceptualizations, right? And if they do, they're bad philosophers also, right? They're not rejecting that experience, for Christ's sake, right? So he's taking that leap into they must be trying to reject the senses. No, that's not what they're saying. Maybe it may sound like it, because it's difficult to explain this problem, which should be obvious. Me trying to do that for an hour on his show without any success, right? Not even close, apparently. And he make this essay here and so on, right? As a spin-off from that show. So it's difficult to explain it without people going crazy over what are they talking about, right? That doesn't mean that there's no good philosophy there, right? Just because you don't understand it.
In order to prove that trains do not exist.
Who the hell is claiming that trains do not exist? What kind of crazy idiot would do that, right? There's a difference between saying, yes, you can have knowledge of this, but I don't have knowledge of it at the moment because I'm an empiricist, right? And if I'm an empiricist and I do not experience train, I do not know train at this point. I am aware that I have a concept that I call train, which I also can, mentally manipulate sitting here in my sofa. But that doesn't mean I know train just because I can, dig out the concept train, right? When I know train is when I have empirical train, right? That is when I have qualia experiences that the mind objectifies as train. then I know train. Okay?
And even if you pull a full Cartesian argument and say that your senses are all being manipulated by an external being of some kind, that you are really a brain in a tank being controlled for some unknowable purpose, you still have not proven that the senses are.
Now, to reiterate on this demon of Descartes, right? He is also misunderstanding what this is, right? It's like, oh, there might be something manipulating you, to making you, making you crazy. No, what this thought experiment tried to point out is, if you have some preconceived ideas of how you interpret those experiences, where do you get those from? What are they based on, right? What are they based on? It's maybe just your habitual thinking, right? You're used to experiencing that, and therefore you say, that is what is there. But that's just an empty argument. That's tautological, right? That's an elephant. That's an elephant because it's an elephant, right? There's an elephant because I'm experiencing elephant. No. You have the experience, and then you say elephant, right? But saying that elephant exists doesn't add anything to that base you used to experience elephant. You're not adding anything. You're not referring to some additional stuff by saying that elephant exists. So what are you basing this on, right? There's no additional stuff you can get to. When you experience elephant, you know elephant, right? And I know we're doing epistemology here, right? Because that's what it's doing, right? So it's no longer metaphysics, even though it calls it an essay on metaphysics, right? So, yeah. And it's quite rambly, my video here, but fuck that.
Invalid. Because in order to be controlled, that external being must have used the evidence of its senses in order to accept that you exist and to wire you up to manipulate you and to make sure your brain receives enough oxygen and nutrition to stay alive. And all of this must be accomplished by the acceptance of objective reality provided through the evidence of the senses for the controlling demon hell-bent on manipulating you. In the same way, a blind...
How would you know? Because you just have your experiences. It's at that point where you have to say, well, I don't know. But that doesn't mean you can decide, okay, well, I have to accept, I don't know. I can't get to it. I don't know what's on the other side of my experiences. I simply can't get there, right? I can't get there. I have to accept that. So I don't know what's on that side that is unknowable, in my opinion. But it doesn't mean that I can say, okay, I'm going to decide that this kind of experience means this, and that kind of experience means that, and so on, right? That's fine. I mean, you don't have to make these decisions, but, I mean, I would want to do that, right? I would want to get some grip on what the hell is going on there, right? It seems that there's some connection between me surviving or me getting about in my experience that experience is there for, right? So it's rejecting your experience is crazy because it's fairly good reasoning to say it must be there because it furthers something that is going on, right? Now, these terms going on, so you might find better terms than that, right? But I have no problem if you said, I don't care about my experience. Fine. I mean, then just, curl up on the floor and wait to die, whatever, right? That's not how I would approach it. And I think that's why you are doing philosophy. That's because you think there's something going on and you need to get a grip on it. That's why you're doing philosophy, right? Because you want to get a grip on that experience and how to understand it and what to use it for and how to categorize it. But the claim I'm going to say is, well, you have to start from that blank slate and that reduction base. And everything that follows from that must refer back to that reduction base in a string of arguments that hangs together, right? Otherwise, you're just bullshitting yourself and everybody else.
Man cannot both demand a seeing eye dog and claim that there is no such thing as vision in any animal. If his own eyes do not work, but he wants a seeing eye dog, it's because he accepts that the dog can in fact see. His deficiency does not prove that eyes do not work, but only that his eyes do not work. In the same way, if you are a brain in a tank being manipulated and therefore cannot trust the evidence of your senses, this does not prove that the senses are invalid, since the being that is controlling you can only do so by accepting the evidence of its own senses.
What? Who says that
A proposition
potential demon,
can never be
you don't
accepted
know
as true
anything about it?
if there is no possible disproof. If we combine this principle with the principle
He's sort of wasting his mind on this, interpreting this demon argument or this demon thought experiment by Descartes, right? Just accept that you can't get to it, right? You can't get to that demon, right? So it's if you're saying that everything is 100%, there isn't anything you do not have access to. Why are you spending time on that demon then? Where is that demon? You should be able to experience it then, right? And say, because I can experience it, it isn't there, you should say then. If it's so perfect and 100%. So what realm are you supposing it is in? Right? You are basically implicitly saying there is actually a part of that external realm that I can't get to. That's where that demon could potentially be. Otherwise, you would say, no, you know, talking about the demon is completely ridiculous because I experience everything. And therefore it can't be there because it can't be outside something that is 100% to me, right? So accepting and trying to refute this demon, you need, without saying it can't be there because there's no room for it. That must be, you're implicitly saying there must be some room somewhere. And that must be a realm you can't access. So there is an inaccessible realm according to your philosophy, or what? Or are you just, you haven't thought this through. You're just, sitting there, farting philosophically in the wind, right? To sound like you know something.
Occam's razor. We can easily throw aside the Cartesian argument that our supposedly objective reality might just be a complex manipulation inflicted on us by an external being. In other words, if we have a perfectly rational explanation that only requires...
Again, as I said, this thought experiment leads to the conclusion that the inevitable conclusion that is, there is an external world you do not have access to. And those experiences you have no way of knowing just from the experiences, which is all you have. Why they're there? Right? You have gotten used to interpreting them in a certain way, and language and all that apparently functions. I'm not trying to reject that, but when you start with metaphysics, you need to remove all preconceived ideas, all habitual thinking, all the dots that you might potentially connect your own way or confirmation bias out the door, right? And then you do it from the blank slate, and then you bring it in as you go along. I wouldn't say bring it in, but when you get to that point and you find out, okay, that at that point I actually, got to concepts, whatever, right? So bringing it in sounds like confirmation bias, right? I didn't mean that. But as you philosophize these particular aspects that you're already using without having done philosophy about it, might pop up in that series of arguments anyway, right? And if they don't, they'll reject them, right? Reject them until they fit into that series of arguments you're creating in your philosophy. So, I lost my train of thought there, but let's head in.
One reality. Claiming, without any standard or disproof, that there is more than one reality is invalid.
More than one reality? So, how does his mind fit into a reality that is independent of his mind, where other minds are? Your mind, the external world is independent of your mind, but you can depend on that external world in order to get other people's mind. But how can you do that if it's independent of that reality? How can you make that connection? If your mind is independent of or that external world is independent of your mind, then it's also independent of other people's mind, I would think, right? So how can you make any deductions about that reality that would lead to a proof of the mind? If they are independent, man, right? You just figured out that contradiction he's using there, right? Holy shit, it's stupid, right?
If we claim that we are a brain in a tank being manipulated by an external demon, and any standard provided that could disprove this hypothesis is rejected out of hand, then the claim fails, because that which is asserted without evidence can be rejected without evidence. Also, as I wrote in my previous book, Essential Philosophy, the proposition that everything we experience could be artificially created by an external demon fails due to Occam's razor, because it falls under the umbrella of infinite regression. If we are being manipulated by a demon, there is no rational reason why that demon itself is not being manipulated by an external demon, and so on to infinity. In other words,
No, but it's a thought experiment, you moron, right? It's not Descartes was not trying to argue for a demon, right? It's a thought experiment that is there to point out to you nothing is given from your senses except that the qualia of those senses, right? When you experience red, there's red. Why there's red and why it is red, you have no way of knowing. It might as well be some outside thing you do not have access to that is inflicting it upon you. Who gives a crap, really, right? What you need to understand is there is an external world. Oh, you don't need to understand that. If there's an external world, was what I was going to say, then what you have of access to that is merely the qualia or the sense data, which is at most a reflection of some kind from that external world, right? Because you can't both be outside your mind and inside the mind at the same time, right? You are working from the inside of your mind. So you are locked within your mind, you could say, right? You have no way of getting out to whatever it is. And if it's a reflection like light or sound or anything like that, well, by definition, it's no longer the thing, right? You know the thing. Joe Biden. Stupid old bastard. You don't have access to the thing. Even when you say, well, I have my senses, I experience it. Well, yeah, but it's no longer the elephant. You're experiencing a reflection of whatever elephant is, right? And if your mind gets something that is a reflection, then it doesn't know what it is, because it only ever got that reflection. It creates elephant in your mind, or presents those qualia that your mind recognizes as elephant. But that doesn't mean that exact thing you're experiencing is also on the other side of that experience, right? That's completely ridiculous.
we would need infinite universes, which means infinite energy, infinite space, and infinite time, in order to even remotely be able to sustain our hypothesis. When none of this is necessary, because we only need one universe for the objective reality delivered through the evidence of the senses hypothesis. Of course, if someone genuinely believes that he is a brain in a tank being manipulated by an external demon, he would never bother to share this hypothesis. because he would only be making the argument within the experiment of the demon, which the demon already knows is an experiment and accepts the facts. I don't bother making the argument to a fellow airline passenger that airplanes exist and that flight is possible because we are already in the air. So he naturally accepts that as a reality. In the same way, if you are just a phantasm created by a demon in my mind, I'm not going to bother trying to convince you of that because the demon which controls you already knows that that is true. That would be like trying to convince a puppet master that he controls his puppets. He already accepts that he does. So you're not convincing him of anything he does not already know. It is certainly possible to reject every shred of evidence against the Cartesian demon hypothesis and maintain that it is true or possible no matter what.
It is not a hypothesis. As I said, it's a thought experiment, right? It's the Cartesian doubt exercise where you keep removing things from what you think you know, only keep things that you are absolutely sure that you can know, right? You can't refute that knowledge or insight or something like that. Well, you keep removing, that's what it does. And then how does he know what his senses tell him? So, well, he says, well, I can't. I don't know what's on the other side of my experiences, right? It might as well be somebody, something, whatever it is, manipulating my mind so that I have these particular experiences. I can't get to it, right? That's what he's trying to say. Yeah, demon. It was from the 17th century they used this kind of term, but you might call it just X or Falula or whatever, right? Doesn't have to be demon. It has negative connotations, right? But you're like you have a benevolent demon handing you information about that outside that is then perfect, right? That's even more crazy.
But then we face the empirical challenge of someone both claiming that you do not exist, while at the same time wanting to change your mind.
Now, I would like him to dig up somebody who says that he doesn't exist. Please find somebody who tells him that he doesn't exist, right? Yeah, I know that when he has guests on discussing things like that, he's trying to manipulate you round and round and round in these sophist circles that might make it sound like you're saying that Stefan Molyneux doesn't exist, but nobody who is a decent philosopher will ever claim that whatever he's experiencing, he's not experiencing. You might have a different opinion about what you mean by existing, but when you get further down to the reduction base, I would say nobody is rejecting their experiences. They might reject how they interpret or be. Nobody, I've never heard anybody saying, well, I don't care about colors, right? Colors is just a show. I don't care about it, right? It's ridiculous. I'm rejecting colors. I've never heard anybody say anything like that anywhere, right? If there's anything that people can actually agree upon, in my opinion, it's the qualia, it's the colors, it's the sounds, and so on, right? 5 senses. That's why it's a good reduction base. That's where you start, because everybody agrees upon that is actually, and that's also, cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am. He's basically saying, Descartes, okay, what I have got is I have experiences, and there's a me having that, being aware of those experiences, right? That's what it's got. Experiences and the me that has an awareness of that experience. And those experiences I interpret as the colors, the sounds, the tastes, the qualia or the sense states or whatever you want to call them, right? That is the starting point. Why they're there? You can't get to it. But it doesn't mean you can't start philosophizing about it, right?
This can only be shrugged off and walked away from. A person who cannot recognize this essential contradiction is beyond reason, and therefore beyond hope. Furthermore, for those of us who accept the prosaic reality that our minds require sustenance and that sustenance is only available in the objective world, it follows exactly that anyone and everyone who argues against the validity of objective reality has spent their whole lives finding sustenance within that objective reality in order to be alive to make the argument against it. It is even crazier than slapping me in order to prove that human beings do not have arms. If a 40-year-old man is arguing with me, claiming that objective reality does not exist, I know with absolute certainty that he has spent 40 years gaining sustenance from objective reality, since we cannot fill our bellies by imagining food. Since he is only alive because he accepts objective reality, arguing against objective reality is arguing against his own existence. If someone screams in my face that he does not exist and sound does not exist and I do not exist, then I take some slow and very careful steps backward, because that person has lost his mind and is extremely dangerous. If someone uses the evidence of my senses to attempt to disprove the validity of my senses, in other words, they make an argument, then they are equally deranged. If someone truly believes that I am an imaginary avatar created by a manipulative demon, and then attempts to convince me of that fact, then they accept that I exist and do not know that I am the product of demonic manipulation. However, if I do not exist, then they are merely talking to the demon, which already knows that it is manipulating that individual. This is about as sane as attempting to convince a prison guard that you are in prison and he is guarding you. We can only pity the derangement that would produce such twisted and distorted arguments. Differentiating between objective and subjective experiences requires only that we accept that one realm provides consistent principles and properties, while the other realm does not.
Well, didn't you say there was not two realms? Now you're talking about two realms? And you don't know two realities, but now there's two realms. There was also the universe. There's a sort of all kinds of description of what is potentially the same, but might not be because you're using different terms now, right? You haven't thought this through, right? You just say, I'm going to write an essay, and you spend 2 hours and you're just brain farting onto paper and reading it out loud and see, I done it. Back and, tacked and backed and dusted, right? Ugh.
Dreams are notoriously chaotic. The rules of identity and physics do not apply consistently. Sometimes we can fly. Sometimes we can breathe underwater or walk through fire without being hurt. A time span of months can occur in a 1-hour dream, or a moment can be stretched out to almost infinity. We abruptly change locations without any transition, meet people long dead, and encounter fantastical creatures with contradictory properties. In comparison, the waking world does not afford us such chaotic luxuries. Objects do not change their properties without cause. Physical laws are never violated. We cannot converse with the dead, fly, or handle fire without being burned. The waking world is absolute, objective, and consistent.
Absolute, objective, and consistent. What does that mean? How does he get to that? He's just saying that in order to make you sort of bitch slap you into submission somehow, right? I'm just adding these fancy, fantastic, stoic words onto my philosophy. You goddamn better accept it. It's stupid, right? It's nothing to do with philosophy. You are not defining anything, and you're not connecting anything with any reduction base that we can handle, right? So you can fart all you want in this direction. You're never going to solve anything because you're basically not doing anything that would be called philosophy, right?
Now, the reply from the Cartesian demon advocates is that the demon simply provides a more consistent reality for our, quote, waking world. However, this hypothesis does not reject or disprove the argument that other minds exist within an objective universe. The fantastical technology that the demon would use to manipulate every aspect of our mind could only be developed via science. And science can only be developed in the presence of objects and energies that have absolutely consistent properties. We could never develop airplanes if gravity randomly reversed itself. Now, the Cartesian demon is a mind that exists in an objective universe whose objects and energies follow absolutely consistent patterns and behaviors. To return to the principle of parsimony, given that the Cartesian demon advocates accept that at least one other mind exists in an objective universe, the universe that the demon has studied in order to produce the technology that manipulates its victim, we can reject this argument out of hand. If the Cartesian demon hypothesis requires that other minds exist in an objective universe, what need do we have for this hypothesis at all? It is a ridiculous overcomplication to accept that other minds exist in an objective universe, the demon and his infernal science,
But you can't get to other minds. You just said you're talking about everything else but the mind in doing metaphysics. And you're not spending time on anything but talking about minds you shouldn't have access to, according to your own statement in the beginning. What the hell are you doing, man, right? Don't you have any kind of sense of rigidity? It's just a mixed bag of words, this, right? There's no rigidity to it. It's self-contradictory. And you're saying it's about this, and then you start to talk about the opposite of what you are claiming in the beginning and so on. And it's like you're just, I need to refute this, so I'm going to throw words at it until I have convinced myself I've refuted it. And then I'm going to say, I've done it. I'm so great, right? Something like that.
It's the far more simple and obvious explanation that the other minds that you can actually see.
You can actually see? What the hell are you talking about, man? How the hell do you see minds? Because I've never heard of it. I can't see any minds anywhere, right? Now you're talking about direct access, direct experience, whatever, right? You're not talking about reasoning and sort of evidence or anything like that. You're talking about experiencing other people's minds. Are you fucking crazy, man, right? What the hell's the matter with you? You just said that metaphysics is everything but the mind. And now you're talking about you can experience people's minds. Oh. What the hell kind of medicine are you on?
Interact with, understand, question, and debate exist in an objective universe. In other words, why would you reject obvious and provable empiricism for the sake of a ridiculously overcomplicated, self-contradictory, and unprovable hypothesis such as the Cartesian demon?
Well, it's because you do not understand the inherent contradiction / paradox built into your thinking, your metaphysics, right? That's why you think you have to refute this fucking demon, right? You are the one who doesn't understand what the hell is going on here. You haven't gotten it, right? So you will be parked in the dustbin of stupid philosophers who weren't able to get to the foundations of metaphysics, right?
Especially since that hypothesis requires exactly the same principles. Why on earth would you reject the existence of the minds you can actually prove and interact with for the sake of a hypothetical mind you can neither prove nor interact with in any way? This would be like making an argument against gravity by claiming that all the gravity that we consistently experience is a total delusion, made possible only by the existence of gravity in another realm that can never be experienced or proven. If you send me an email claiming that emails never get delivered, and you know this because emails in an alternate dimension that can never be experienced are consistently delivered, and clearly you accept that emails can be consistently delivered because you accept this in another realm, but you reject the evidence of your own actions and your consistent experience by sending me an email that you claim will never be delivered. If we are together on a sunny beach and you tell me that sunburns are a complete delusion, and you know this because an unknowable being in another realm told you that it got a sunburn, would you consider this a remotely sane argument? I know I am laboring the point, but this madness has infected philosophy for as long as there has been philosophy, and I'm pretty sick and tired of it.
Well, what is mad is you saying that you could talk about something that is independent of your mind. If you have and that is superior according to your own standards, right? That external independent world or mind independent whatever is superior to your mind. Then why the hell do you have a mind then that can be wrong if you already have access to that perfect world, right? Why do you have a mind if you have everything else? Why would you have some secondary stuff trying to make sense of that which you already know to be perfect? No, because you have misunderstood this. You are working from inside the mind. You're just over-interpreting things, right? And that's why you meet these philosophers who can actually think for themselves and go deeper than you can possibly go. That's why you're confused. That's why you have to tell them they're crazy, right? Because you don't get it, man, right?
Which, of course, is not an argument, but it is a real motivation for me, as it would be for anyone, I think. The argument is crazy and self-contradictory and anti-rational, and is disproven by the very actions of the person making the argument, which is to communicate clear language through an objective realm, through the senses, to another mind he accepts exists. So, what is going on here? I cannot answer this with any absolute accuracy, but I can create a hypothesis that accords with my considerable experience debating these matters over the last 40 years. For the average person, the Cartesian demon argument cannot be intellectually overturned, at least without practice and assistance. The average person just knows that it is wrong. It is a deep and powerful instinct to reject such delusions, because if we believed them, they would cause our near immediate demise. We want to survive, so we reject metaphysical madness. Or, to put it another way, those who accepted and practiced this metaphysical madness did not survive to pass on. They're deranged.
I'm just having a thought. Maybe his militant materialism or physicalism here is one of the reasons why his daughter has turned into a Christian, right? And wanting to do politics. It's just a thought, right? Maybe it helps that the mother is possibly Orthodox Greek religious Christian, right? But you know, if there's no room for having these kinds of thoughts and doing this kind of philosophy, you're immediately attacked by your father. Well, then there's sort of a wiggle room within Christianity where you can go and be a theologian, right? Well, it's just a thought, right? If you have such a militant materialist father, right, who's rejecting any kind of idealism as being completely crazy, right? It's sort of a safe space. Could be religion. I don't know, but just a thought.
Means. So, the average person knows that the argument is ridiculous and wrong, but they lack the expertise and language to rebut and to
How, have they ever heard about the demon argument or the demon thought experiment? I don't think so, right? And did they know about it before Descartes? Had they gone around in the Stone Ages or something like that, thinking about the demon and saying, no, it's crazy, right? Somebody does a line of thinking that leads to a potential thought experiment where he's trying to elaborate on how do I really know, how do I really know about any of the preconceived ideas of interpretations of my experiences? Well, his conclusion is he doesn't, right? There's nothing about the experience themselves that tells him they should be interpreted as this or that or the other, right? The color red is just the color red. The sound of X is the sound of X, or this sound is this sound, and this feel and this smell and so on is just that smell, right? There's nothing in it that tells you it should be interpreted like this. That is all that Descartes is trying to tell you, right? You have to think it out for yourself. Nothing is given to you, right? Basically, it's almost like Descartes is saying the opposite of what Stefan Molyneux thinks he's trying to say, right? It's obnoxiously stupid what he's doing.
The average person is left with an uneasy feeling, a sense that philosophy, as it is presented.
So now he's telling you what most people in the world think. He's sort of pushing the idea that the rest of the world has gotten it, right? You're just a stupid idiot for having these kinds of skeptical thoughts or doubtful thoughts about your experience, right? And he's sort of saying, well, everybody else is sort of the bandwagon argument or majority argument or something. Well, if the majority of people thinks that, it must be right, right? Something like that. He's trying to sophist you into accepting or feeling small. So you're going to say, I guess it's me who's just stupid. I have to accept the big philosopher guy.
Them in this instance is exceedingly dangerous and will get them killed if they pursue it.
Thoughts are dangerous.
What do they do then? Why, whenever the topic of philosophy comes up, they roll their eyes, re-experience this existentially uneasy feeling, and back away as quickly as possible.
It must be because he can experience other people's minds. He has been able to look in and see how they feel, and all their intentions and all that. He's simply so all-knowing God mode, apparently, right?
In other words, the Cartesian demon hypothesis acts as an inoculation against the possible virtue, wisdom, and knowledge that philosophy could provide. In the same way, if for some sadistic reason you wished your child to be terrified of dogs, you would simply expose her to the loudest and most invasive and dangerous dogs you could find. And then, most likely for the rest of her life, she would feel uneasy around dogs. Of course, nature has programmed us this way. If we encounter something that interferes with our thriving and survival, we work very hard to avoid it in the future. We tend to be wary of uncontrolled fires, large predators, small poisonous insects, edibles that made us sick in the past, and so on. Pain, as a mechanism, is designed to help us avoid situations that cause injury and discomfort. When we experience something negative, or the threat thereof, we avoid the situation or stimuli. This is an instinctive practice common to all living creatures. In the Cartesian demon hypothesis, philosophy is a dangerous predator that has the power to infect someone with suicidal insanity. In their lizard brains, people respond to this argument in the same way that they would respond to someone trying to drug them with a vile concoction that would drive them mad and cause them to run off cliffs. The argument was essentially invented and has been prevalent for thousands of years in order to drive people away from philosophy.
I mean, he can really concoct a story about what the purpose is of this, right? And Descartes invented that demon thought experiment in the 1500s or 1600s. I'm not sure. Maybe in both, right? But then he's lumping everybody who has attempted anything but hardcore materialism into this pile of people who has been trying to get you away from philosophy. I mean, he's trying to create a story. It's like he's so hung up that he needs a story to explain that sort of fits with his ideas of these bad people out there who is constantly lurking around and waiting for any opportunity to get under your skin and into your mind and screw with you, right? I mean, it's like he's possessed by that thought. It's sort of a paranoia or something like that, right? And therefore he ends up in these speeches where he basically says that he's afraid of people who can think differently, right? If you can't exercise another person's thoughts and try to connect them with your own thoughts, but you immediately, call them crazy and I mean, that is crazy. That's why I'm labeling you as crazy, because you are the crazy one. They're just trying to think, right? And think for themselves rather than taking something for granted that has been implanted in them by whatever you call society or habitual thinking or whatever, right? Thinking that because you read something in the book, now you know that. That is fucking stupid, right? That is stupid. You are jumping to conclusions you can't possibly jump to from the foundations you have presented. You are the crazy one here. You're not rigid in your philosophy. I wouldn't even call it philosophy. You're basically just throwing words around, in my opinion, right? This incoherent babbling that is useless unless you want to be a part of some kind of weird cult where you want to lick somebody like Stefan Molyneux in the ass and say, yeah, let's go get them. We are militant materialist. Something like that, right? That is fucking stupid.
This is also a common practice in the realm of libel and slander. If someone has an argument you cannot answer, but it interferes with your interests or offends your sensibilities, the usual tactic is to coat that person with negative labels so that people will steer clear and stay away. In the same way, philosophy tends to undermine political power by giving everyone the ability to think and reason for themselves.
Yeah, unless you are, fall in love with Orange Man, then it's the opposite. Then philosophy works with the power. Isn't that the case? So it's like I don't really buy that, anarchist approach you have to philosophy. It seems to me like it's just a matter of time before somebody is able to get under your skin and say, hey, I'm going to save everybody. I'm Donald Trump. I've written a book and I'm rich and I have a photo model a model wife, and therefore I'm going to rule the world. And he's sort of licking his ass for years. I mean, that's not philosophy sort of rejecting politics or anything like that, right? You have become that which you have warned everybody about.
And by promoting virtue that reduces the need for police, governments, courts, and prisons. If I were an evil ruler, I could do little better than to create or fund a hypothesis that had people avoid and recoil from philosophy. I would make philosophy as ridiculous and dangerous as possible, so that people would steer clear and continue to let me do their, quote, thinking for them.
Just like you do, right? You are doing the exact same thing here, right? You're telling them, these people are bad. It's bad philosophy over there. Come over here to my philosophy, right? You're doing exactly that. Fucking. It's incredible that, sort of, it's a sign of narcissism and sort of megalomania. Yeah, when you can see everybody else, the problems in how everybody else behaves, and then you have the exact same behavior, but you can't see that. That's because you're perfect. You're never doing anything wrong. I don't have to analyze myself. Don't have to look at what I do and compare it to what I'm saying. No, I can talk about everybody else, and it doesn't matter what I'm doing because I'm perfect, right? So it just reeks of, he doesn't really give a shit, right? It's in his, it's a mental frame where he's working from, I have gone through some shit in my youth or my childhood, and I came out of it using philosophy, and therefore the rest of the world has not come through the gate yet. I have to help them with my perfect philosophy, and if they're doing something else, there's something wrong with them. They don't want people to get through the gate, and something like that, right? It's sort of it's manic in a way, right? Sort of a mixture of mania and paranoia, something like that, right?
Rational thinking and empirical observation is the birthright of all human beings. The clear effect of the Cartesian demon hypothesis is to drive people away from philosophy by making it abstract, ridiculous, crazed, and deadly. What is perfect about this argument is how it describes itself in its own formulation. The Cartesian demon hypothesis is that an external authority is denying you reality by controlling your perceptions. This is a perfect description of the purpose and effect of this hypothesis. Rulers and their toadies deny you reality by controlling your perceptions. They accuse a theoretical demon of doing exactly what they are doing to you. Oh, break out. Break free. Accept reality. Reject rulers and
accept. Don't think for yourself. Don't philosophize. Just do as I, as a philosophical ruler, tell you to do. You're doing what you are warning people against, you fucking stupid asshole, right? I mean, it's... Oh, man. It drives me fucking crazy, this idiot, right? Oh.
For yourself. All right, so there is my essay, and I'm quite pleased with it. And if you have comments, issues, problems, anything you would like to talk about with regards to this essay, I am more than happy to help. If you have other topics completely, that's fine, but let's just give people the chance if they have something they want to say on this topic. I would be very happy to hear about it. Let me just check comments here.
If he doesn't like it, he'll mute you, of course, like he did with me, right? So he's, I'm so open for discussions about this. Yes, I'm so interested in hearing what people have to say. After telling people they're fucking crazy if they don't agree with him, right? So he's only going to get somebody who's going to lick him in the ass, right? And then he's satisfied. Hey, I got it, man. Yeah, I've scared them away. Ugh. Oh, man. Okay. This is the end of my deconstruction of his weird essay on metaphysics, or claiming to be metaphysics. I would beg to differ very strongly, right? As you possibly have gathered from my comments here, right? Maybe I should send this deconstruction to him. He wants some feedback on his essay, right? Do you think I should send an email with this? Let me know. Otherwise, join the board, share, like, and subscribe, all the good stuff. Give me a comment. Let me hear your opinion. What do you think of this? Otherwise, see you in the next video.